So if I can introduce Brian. So Brian Clews has lived in Berkshire for 40 years, produced the Berkshire Birding Bulletin for 30 years, and been part of the Wild Guides publishing team since 2000.
And do we advance it? Page down?
Oh,
that one. Okay.
Okay. He's going to talk to us about WildCookham, Wind in the Willows Revisited. So,
thank you very much, sir. Good morning, or good afternoon. No, it's still morning, I think. Hello, everybody, including those at home still having their sandwiches in your Jimmy Jams or whatever you're up to. But yes, I just wanted to give an update on a topic that was covered in a previous conference here, Water Voles. And I thought it'd be of interest to folk to see what we've been able to do as a small group in Cookham to reintroduce this little creature. So that's what the title of the talk is all about. And it all comes down to a little bit of history. I'm sure you all know Water Vole as Ratty in the good old story of Kenneth Graham, Wind in the Willows. Who's read Wind in the Willows? Surely, yes, everybody. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? He lived in Cookham while writing that book many years ago in a little place called Herries, which is a local school now, but it used to be known as Mayfield when he lived there with his family, and that's when he wrote this amazing little storybook about 4 particular characters, which included, of course, Badger. Who's seen Badger lately? I think we know we've got plenty of badgers left around. They're well set in their environment. See what I did there? We've still got moles. Who's seen a mole? You've actually seen moles, not just the humps. You've actually seen, you're doing better than me. I've only ever seen one. It jumped up in front of me while I was digging on my allotments, which completely spoilt my day because once it disappeared again, I didn't know where to dig without likely chopping his head off. So I had to give up. Only ever seen the one. We see the mounds. We know there's lots, and we've still got lots of those in the Cookhams. And of course, we've still got toad. Although this year's numbers were dramatically lower than previously, and I know a number of sites around here do a toad patrol, and that was one of the first projects that WildCookham set up when we invented ourselves in 2016. So we have a toad crossing, a toad patrol. But what about the 4th member? Who can remember what the 4th member was? It was, of course, Ratty, which was not a rat. It was something that some folk know as the water rat, but it's of course what most folk know as water vole. We'd not had any vole sightings in the Cookhams for nearly 30 years. And so we were determined we should do something about it. And while we were talking about it, a photograph appeared on one of our Facebook pages. This one, that one, by a local photographer who put it up on the Facebook page as, oh, I saw a rat. And I thought you'd like to see a photograph of it. Of course, as soon as I saw it, as you can probably tell if you know your water voles, it wasn't a rat at all. It was a water vole, and it was just south of Maidenhead, not far from where we are in Cookham. And we thought, uh-oh, we've got fairly advanced in this project. Have we actually got them? And nobody's seeing them. So we did a bit more accurate surveying, couldn't find any. So we're determined we should press ahead and go for a reintroduction scheme. You may know that the statistics show that over the last 50 years, we've lost something like 97% of the water voles in the United Kingdom. That's not a good thing to boast about, is it, in a nation that says we're very keen on our wildlife and all the rest of it. There used to be 8 million of them, apparently, way back in 1776. I've no idea how they measured that. That's how many people we had anyway in 1776, but somebody reckons we had as many as 8 million voles at one point. And when it was realised that they'd dramatically dropped away, a whole range of projects started up UK-wide to reintroduce them. And that's exactly what's been happening for quite a few years now. And even though they've had something like 30 projects up and down the country, we still think there's only about 132,000, according to latest surveys, in the UK. Well, I mean, there's that many people living in Maidenhead. So, I mean, that's not a big number, is it, compared to the 8 million we think we used to have? So we need more and more reintroduction schemes. So even though we're a very small, still are quite a small wildlife group in a very small part of Berkshire, we thought we should have a go at it. And we looked at the causes that have resulted in all of this, which included, of course, our polluted rivers, as we used to know. That situation seems to have been redressed and waters are now a lot better than they used to be. We still have sprays from farmland on the water banks in ditches and streams around us, but not much we can do about that other than the public pressure and government pressure on farmland and landowners to do less of that. But of course, the biggest problem we've had in more recent years is actually not conditions, it's creatures. And I'm sure you'll recognize this as a mink. Who's seen a mink? Well, not as many people as I would have thought, because over the years they have been quite common. Maybe you thought they were something else when you saw them. But, well, it's a pretty looking little creature, isn't it? Cuddly little thing, perhaps, looks to us. But it has another side to it, which is important to our project. First of all, it is invasive. It's a non-native species, of course, so shouldn't really be here. It was introduced into the country as a product, if you like, for fur farming in the 1920s, when that sort of attire was de rigueur. If you wanted to go out somewhere on a Saturday night, you put your fur coat on. And during that time, of course, any number of them would have probably escaped. But usually as an individual getting out into the wild, you'd probably live a few years, but you wouldn't necessarily find them. Was wreaked over the subsequent. So it was thought about. Is not unusual. They're quite a meaty beastie, sort of 5 kilograms. So that's a fair weight that has to be sustained by how much they eat every day. And they do have, unfortunately, quite a good appetite for our other waterways creatures. To try and counterbalance this, the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, you may have heard, set up 530 specific control sites to try and reduce the numbers of mink in the wild. And that was probably at least doubled, if not more, by casual landowners who decided to do the same thing on their own bat, as it were. So there has been quite a big campaign to try and cull and control the numbers of these for quite some time. These creatures are essentially teeth on legs. So there's a picture you can see that shows that quite well. There's 34 of those teeth, to be precise. So there's a lot of them to break the neck of an unsuspecting water vole, moorhen, or whatever they can get access to. They're fearsome in the water. They've got webbed feet, which not all of our water mammals will have, so they can swim quite a distance at quite a speed. They can go underwater for over 100 meters by all accounts and dive down to 5 meters. So if you're in the water and one of these show up, it's going to be a bit difficult to get out of its way. I certainly wouldn't want to go in the water if I knew there was one around. And another unfortunate feature that they seem to have in their lifestyle is that they kill on opportunity. They're opportunistic predators, and they'll just stash away anything that's surplus to their daily needs. A few friends and I were down bird watching on the Jubilee River a few years ago, and we'd been monitoring a little tern colony that had set up on one of the islands in the middle of the river. And between about 8 pairs, they'd produced 28 young terns, and they'd been there from fledglings, hatchlings, fledglings, and now they were getting to the point after a couple of 3 weeks of pretty much full size, flapping their wings, ready to exercise and fly off, having the adults having provided all the food for them during that 3 or 4 week period. That was the moment the mink decided to strike. And for the next 20 to 25 minutes, we watched all 28 young terns plucked off the islands, taken over the far bank, stuffed down holes that were already prepared for them. They'd got it all worked out, 2 of them working in harmony. To be honest, we were doing everything we could, throwing stones, sticks, shouting, whatever, to try and deter it. But they took the lot in about 20 minutes. So that is numbers, and in Berkshire there were known to be among various possibly others, but we had and encouraged to have a go at it. So what was going to be involved in doing? Not Fortunately, because of one or two landowners who kept chickens in the area, there'd been an element of informal mink monitoring and culling over a period of 10 previous years. So we got some data, some statistics, some information that helped us to get started. And so it took us about 18 months to review what was going on, to get the blessings of supervising organisations, to consider seriously what was going to be involved, because these are not projects to take on lightly. And then eventually we were put in touch with an organisation that rears the animals in an ecology centre in a professional manner, government approved and all the rest of it. And they were willing to supply us with animals to release, providing we satisfied all the authorities that we were a good organisation to do that. We then got a good team of volunteers. Yes, okay. And then the culmination of that was last year we released the first of 90 animals into several little areas of water in a particular part of the village. It was going to be easier to maintain, some of it on private land, so they would be less disturbed. And that's how we started off. The big exercise then was to monitor those for the next year, because if we could convince everybody concerned that they were doing well, they would then be satisfied to let us put the second phase in, which would be the final part of this particular project. We were very fortunate to be supported by the professional people in all of these sorts of exercises, the Environment Agency and the local Wildlife Trust, together with the National Water Vole Monitoring Project, which is headed by Dr. Merrill Gelling. They looked at all our plans, all our ideas, all the sites we were going to do it, and guided us as to the best way. And then theirs was the final decision as to whether we were a suitable group to have a go at it. To do the monitoring activity afterwards to convince everybody what we were doing. Is that really my time up? I just heard a bump. Oh, I thought that was me being told to shut up. Budgets, okay, it costs money, folks, to do this sort of thing, and a number of folk in the village had already made a contribution, but we still had to get around with the begging bowl to as many organisations as we could. So the obvious way to do that is to create an executive summary to put down the best opportunities that we could find, the best practices that we could delineate, without it being too technical a document, enough for professional fundraising and fund providing organisations to show that we know that we mean business and we're likely to succeed. We knew that we were going to have to find around £10,000 to £12,000 to pay for the animals to be reared. We have to monitor the mink, and that requires a series of rafts with plasticine bottoms so that we can look for their footprints, and they have to be put round on about a 2 to 3 or 4 mile radius, so we needed several of those, and they cost a bit of money as well, plus all the various printing of umpteen sheets of risk assessments and all this sort of thing that all the team members had to go through. So we reckon we would have a final target. We're going to need over £18,000. So we're not going to raise that at raffles in the village necessarily. So we would have to do that separately. And we did. We were successful. So here then is Ratty. This is a water vole. I know you're not supposed to use the C word in the wildlife initiatives, apparently, but come on, that's quite cute, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's about 30 centimetres long, 300 grams, so compared to that 5 kilo mink, just a snack really. They live quite short lives, 5 months is typical, but if they overwinter as adults, they can go for up to a year, and they do have up to 3 or 4 litters a year. So if we can get a few pairs to stay and hang around in the holiday centre of Cookham, then we could create some good numbers, and that's what we would obviously hope to find as time goes on. The problem for surveying them, though, is a bit like me. They get very inactive over winter, so they'll spend a lot more time in their burrows and bank holes. So the evidence we'd be looking for is much harder to find between knee depth snow and ice along the edge of the water, or whatever we have to contend with. So we don't expect to see a lot of information over the next few months. So this is a nasty rat. This is what we could confuse our nice little water vole with. About the same sort of length, maybe a little bit longer, more pointed at both ends. The tail is quite naked, whereas the vole has got quite a furry sort of tail. And of course, the ears with the rat are very prominent, whereas as you can see with the water vole, you can hardly see them. So there are some good indicators. If you see a creature clear enough for more than, say, a couple of seconds, you've got a good chance of telling between the two. So this is the sort of training we gave all of our monitors. And incidentally, one thing we've had a good idea about, well, I had a good idea about, we've got a paddle board group in the main, and they get up all the sorts of areas of water we probably can't get to, and where there's no footpaths and through private land we wouldn't get onto. So we got them involved and we got them trained up, and they can see both banks at the same time when they're in the middle of the water. So that was a little trick we added on to multiply the effectiveness of our surveying. And this is the mink I mentioned before, quite a long creature, very dark, quite distinctive, looks more like a mini otter really than anything else. So if you look at them side by side, these are the points I've just made. Water vole, hardly see any ears, 4 ears, short furry tail, and the rat, much more prominent nose, sticky up ears, and a naked tail. Now that's easy to say when you see them for a while. If they've just scurried through a bit of vegetation, let's be fair, you're not going to be 100% sure. If it disappears up a hole in the middle of the river, more likely to be a vole than a rat. When you see them swimming on the water, this is something else we've had to train our folk to look out for. A rat on the water will still always show those very prominent ears. You can't see the tail, you can see the back, you can see the head, but the ears will be sticking up. So that's one thing. Whereas, of course, with the water vole, you still can't see the tail. That's a similar sort of feature, but again, not really seeing any sides of the ears. So that's the sort of thing we've trained people to look for. Whereas with the mink, it'll look 2 to 3 times as long. You can see its head, its back, and its tail on the surface of the water. It looks more like an aircraft carrier than anything else coming along at you. So quite distinctive if you see one of those instead. In terms of diet and what we have to do looking at the habitat, for the water vole, it has to be a good amount of 50-metre bank length, ideally, of nice short grasses or fairly thin reeds. It won't eat material as thick as my thumb, but it will nibble anything smaller than, say, the thickness of your little finger. And they don't go too far from the bankside, so even if there's nice lovely grass 3 or 4 or 5 feet into the field or the footpath, they're not bothered. It's got to be somewhere near the water's edge so they can quickly escape if something like me turns up. Or of course, increasingly along our footpaths these days, dogs which want to get in the water. So that's what they're looking for. And with their burrows, they can just be one spaced many meters apart, or you might suddenly find a bank like this one riddled with holes, which would probably be a whole family, each with their own little bedroom or playroom or play space or whatever. But they also have some under the waterline that you not necessarily see, so they can escape from predators that might be pursuing them. One thing that people wonder why you walk along trying to monitor for voles at about this sort of pace, because they don't realise that what you've got to look for are tiny little grass ends nibbled off at 45 degrees. I don't think it's that the teeth are necessary at 45 degrees. It's probably more likely they're looking for predators all the while, so they've got their heads on an angle, but they do leave what they've nibbled with this 45-degree edge. And that's what you've got to look to with close focus binoculars to be sure that you've got voles and not ordinary field voles that will chop it off at a vertical sort of level, horizontal level, or even ducks that have just ripped it off in the same way. So that is a very useful and specific point, but it is slow progress. And then they'll often just put a pile of the bits they've nibbled to one side to come back to them later. I've had kids like that. That's what they do with most of their meals. So we're looking for that sort of evidence if we can see it. And of course, like most of us, they're leaving droppings all over the place, and we can identify those as well. In the same setting, you're going to find rat and mouse and field vole droppings as well. But the distinctive features are, and there's pictures here showing them alongside a 20p coin. The mouse droppings are significantly smaller. They look like hundreds of thousands, but I wouldn't try risking it. There'll be mouse droppings if they're in the wild. And the rat ones as well, much bigger than the voles. The best thing to look for is that both those droppings have got pointed ends which you might be able to see on the main picture. Whereas with the vole, they're pretty green because all they eat is greenery, and they're rounded at both ends. And another thing the vole conveniently does is leave piles of them at what we call latrines, so they're a little bit easier to find if you can see the flatter areas of the bank clear enough. So here's a typical vole latrine. They'll just keep coming backwards and forwards to this one, a bit like badgers, and adding to it day by day. So our current situation then, after running this project now for 3.5 years, is that we've now released a second phase this year with another 100 or so animals. So we've put 200 of these creatures now into our local water system. It is connected at both ends to the Thames, and another leg of it goes right the way into the middle of Maidenhead and out the other side. So our hopes would be, in due course, we might be able to work with our colleagues in Wild Maidenhead to have a similar scheme on the other side of Maidenhead to join it all together. All the banks of all the little streams that we've got have been inspected for field signs. Even last week, we probably did what will be our final survey, and we found evidence, droppings and nibbled grasses on all the 3 areas that we'd released the 2 phases of animals. So going into this winter, it's good news that we've got signs of the animals surviving in each area. Winter does tend apparently to curtail their numbers by up to 80%. So we're coming into the most difficult part of the time, and we won't know till next spring when we do all this work again, more survey work, as to whether or how many of them have actually survived. So that's what we'll be up to next spring. What we need to do in the meantime is ensure that as many landowners as possible will help us to maintain the bankside with suitable habitat. And that's a bit of a hit and miss programme. Some landowners have indicated they're willing to work with us and do whatever's necessary to help. Others, to be honest, couldn't care less. They're just going to carry on doing what they always do, and it'll just be a question of whether the voles can survive that or not. But we'll urge who we can and do what we can to encourage them. Always in these projects, isn't it? There's a few surprises that will come, and we'd heard some rumours around over months before, but hadn't really believed them until somebody spotted a quite sizable footprint, not inside the raft where the little plasticine bits will have their footprints, but actually on top of the lid. We've all nursed that. So we put a trail camera down at that particular one, and the following night got some lovely evidence of a pair of otters actually gambolling and playing and then eventually mating on the roof of one of our mink monitoring rafts. And this confirmed some of the fishermen's tales that we'd heard over previous months, that I'm sure I saw an otter while I was scrumping fish on somebody's land the night before, and it turned out they were right. And now we believe we've actually got 2 pairs of otters just in that little stretch of stream and Thames around that Cookham lump on the east end of the county. So there's probably more around than we know about. So that's been a lovely discovery. I think at the end of the day, people might ask, is this going to work? Well, I don't know, and I don't suppose any members of our team can know for certain. What we've done is we've put them back where they used to be, which is a start. We've managed the predators as best as we can, and that's going to be an ongoing task. We can't just put that to one side now. We've done what we can to encourage the landowners concerned to do their bit, and some of them are going to contribute, we're sure, to give success to the project. And as I've said, unfortunately, others are just too hidebound in what they're doing and not interested in talking to us again. But we have already got a small handful of Cookhamites who will be able to say, yes, just like my predecessors, I've seen a water vole in Cookham. And we hope that will be the case for more and more people. And as we're now more freely advertising the project, we kept it a bit quiet for a while. Hopefully more and more people will keep an eye open and will be blessed by seeing this particular creature. So in terms of will it work? Well, I don't know. We're just praying. I guess the voles are just praying as well. Let's hope it does work, and then it may be a project we can see repeated all over the county, maybe. Who knows? Thank you very much, though. Don't know if there's any questions, if there's time. Oh, good. We've given everybody everything they need to know. Could I just mention something on the bookshop? We've already had mention from Graham about the common micro moss. That's just about the newest book on the bookstall, so do come and have a look at that. The other new one that's also hot off the press is one from the BOC that's produced through Renton Rigoletto's exceptional work, Berkshire's birdscapes. It talks about how the county has changed over the 70 years since BOC was formed and what's happened to both the landscapes and the birds associated with it in those 70 years. So that's a new one you might not yet have seen. Thank you, sir.
Right. Okay, thank you. We're a little bit behind, so we're going to break for lunch now. What time is it? So, and we're going to shorten it to half an hour. So we'll be back for 20 to 2, when we'll pick up again with John Cole talking to us about the Ben's Anniversary BioBlitz. So for those of us here, lunch is at the back. Please go and help yourselves. And for those online, we'll see you in half an hour.